first started back in spring 2015, and it was a flyer that came through from the Maths Hub. And I was intrigued by it because it was Debbie Morgan was speaking, they had the DFE, and also some schools that had already been doing mastery for a year that were trialling it. I didn't know much about it at all, so I took myself and one of my teachers that's very strong on teaching and learning, we thought we'd go to Birmingham and just to see and find out what it was all about. And it was on that day, I think within half an hour, we both knew, you know, this was very exciting, and it seemed quite revolutionary for maths and the way that they're teaching. We heard from some Chinese teachers, and we heard from schools, both primary and secondary, that had adopted the mastery approach, and they were telling their story, and it just sold it to me. And I think probably the biggest reason why both of myself and Gemma wanted to go for the mastery was that the whole thought of leaving no child behind. And throughout the day, that was the very strong message about taking every child with you.
And in terms of adopting it at your school, then how did that progress from there?
During the journey back, although Gemma at the time wasn't leading on maths, somebody else was, we had a journey back. We said that she could lead on the mastery. And what it was about getting the training. So both herself and somebody who was strong in Key Stage 1 spent 3 days in London. So I went down to London and with Ben Haar, who was the Maths No Problem, did some training there, and then we spent the summer term skilling up our staff, because I think one of the key issues was the subject knowledge as well of staff, both teachers and with our support staff. So what we wanted to do is, yes, look at the pedagogy behind mastery, but also looking at the quality and the depth of subject knowledge for all our members of staff that are teaching mathematics in school. So we spent the whole of that summer term doing CPD, and then to launch it in the September. Originally, we were going to do just year 1 and year 2. So we thought we'd go for year 1 and year 2 because of the cost of the resources. Thankfully for us, the Maths Hub were going to subsidise some of the books. But we thought we'll go year 1 and 2, but the whole pedagogy and the style of teaching maths will go whole school. However, we quickly learnt that, you know, we need to get the resources for all of the school as well. So by the half term, from years 1 to 6, we had the resources and the books in place. But it was very, very heavy on CPD. So lots of us, it was a big learning experience for all staff. And I think Gemma leading it was just a little bit of a step ahead of us, but we all went with her.
Can we think about the structure of the school day? Have you had to change that at all?
So we changed the timetable that we teach maths. So the whole school teach maths now at 9:30 in the morning. Then they teach maths, they deliver the concept, then at 10:10 they go to assembly, and those children that were finding that day difficult, haven't quite grasped it, will stay behind, have an intervention during assembly. So when the children have finished assembly, they go back to complete the textbooks. Those children are then able to be successful. And that took most of the autumn term to come up with that structure. And we tried lots of different methods in between, and we finally thought, no, this is what's working, and that works with both Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2.
Okay. What about classroom layout? Has that changed at all?
Yes, it is, and again, it was just one of those journeys that we tried various different methods, but all the teachers prefer the horseshoe method. So it looks quite traditional when you look at it, but it means that all the children are facing you. And it's that interaction, because during the 40 minutes of input, it's very much teacher-led, but the children are engaging throughout, using whiteboards, using lots of different apparatus. We use manipulatives all the time. They use partner work, but it was very much, to me, to you, it's like tennis. And so by them facing the teacher, that was the best layout that we found that works well.
And how was it before?
Before, they were set up in groups. Right. So they were set up in groups, but then you didn't have children facing the board, or it was a little bit awkward. So, and also they could be easily distracted. So what we do for maths and for maths, it's like a horseshoe and it's facing the teacher. But when in the afternoon, or if they were doing a maths investigation, it might be that the tables changed if they were to then do group work.
Right. And what about who they sit with? Has that changed? Were the
Yeah,
tables set
we
by
don't have
ability?
we don't have ability setting.
Right.
So
Did you have that before?
we used to do target groups for maths a while ago. We stopped doing target grouping, so it was mixed ability classes, and some teachers were still sitting children in ability groups, but what we do is completely random. So they can be sat with somebody that's not quite age related and somebody that's working at a greater depth will be sat together. And what we found is those discussions are so important that the children are having with one another.
Right. And do you change the seating regularly? Or
Yes, they do. Often every half term, what we like to do is that every child, for those social skills and be able to work with different children, we vary it, so we change it every half term, so they do get to work with different people.
Right, you talked a little bit about the importance of staff development and sort of in tandem with the textbooks. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more and just explain how you've done the main part of your staff development and how you've coped with having staff going out to CPD elsewhere and that sort of thing?
Yes, I think the probably the biggest CPD was for Gemma Whiley to go on the primary maths specialist training. And so that was a year that she took to do the training. So along with the Maths No Problem training, she was having the specialist training through the National Centre of Mathematics with Debbie Morgan. So that was really good. But what we had to make sure that was just not one person that was coming back into school. So she was on a rapid learning curve with that, and it was making sure it was taking all staff with her. So we knew that the staff meetings and inset days were very heavily weighted on teaching of mathematics. So along with the pedagogy and the style, so for example, the bar models that we were looking at, user manipulatives and different variations of concepts, she was teaching us that, and so all staff knew what does mastery look like. But along with it, we were finding, in order to teach that properly, the subject knowledge had to be sound. So it was twofold. It was the pedagogy behind the mastery and the subject knowledge of all staff. So what we did is every member staff has 45 minutes each week, and that's dedicated CPD time for them. So that's their focus they can work on. And a year 6 teaching assistant, she's a very good mathematician herself, but she frees herself up to work one-to-one with staff or in a small group on an area of maths that they need to work on. And how we did that is let all members of staff sit the year 6 maths paper and kind of discover their own gaps. Where are their gaps in their learning and where would they require some support? So it was in a non-threatening way. They could do it at home, but they had to identify where their strengths and areas of development, and we could, mainly in-house, we'd be able to support them. And that was really important. Also, I think it was the discussions that teachers were having. Because it was a brand new concept for us all with the mastery, it was okay to say that I don't quite understand this and I don't quite get it. How do we stretch our more able and still bring along our SEND children in the same lesson? And all those conversations about teaching and learning were happening in a very safe platform, because I think teachers felt it was okay. It doesn't matter if I've been teaching 20 years, this is a brand new concept. And it created a culture that it was okay to ask for help. And quite interestingly, it was one of our students that was a trainee, a skit student that we had in place, that he was very good at looking at the assessment of it and how do we record that within a lesson, and we adopted it, that whole school, his template, how we're going to assess. And I think it was, the reason I tell you that is because everybody felt valued and that we were learning together. Right. And I think that's why quickly it made an impact.
If you think about your expectations of your teachers in terms of maths, I'm just wondering if that's changed at all, you know, that what you're expecting in terms of planning, what you're expecting in terms of marking, that sort of thing. Has that changed?
Yes, it has. Again, the planning format, that changed numerous times over last year. But we do it with some key questions that they need to ask. And one of them is, what if they already know this? And what and what if they can't do the task? Okay, and how can you get them to prove that they can learn it in a different context? So it's about going deeper. But I think all the time, because initially it was our more able, both parents and children, and even some of our staff members, it was their query was, what about the more able and how are we going to stretch them? So on our planning format, that's the first question that we always ask: what if they already know this and they can do this? So what's the lesson going to do? You know, how are you going to cater for those children?
Yeah. And how are you catering for those children?
Well, it's great. We've got it's like a speech bubble. So your speech bubble for the age related, but we also have one for those at greater depth. So we're all the time, it's all the planning is all on a smart. So they have the questions at the beginning, and it's about crafting that lesson. The thought process that goes into the lesson is so incredibly important. So, and that was done in teams. So Gemma, during last year, worked with teachers to go through the crafting of the lesson and the journey, and they did the smarts together. And this was before any of the anchor tasks that you would come across in the textbooks. So often what we found was that the children get to the textbooks, but there was a lot of unpicking of skills that they need or knowledge, and they needed that prior to doing the task. So we had to go back, unpick it, what is it that they need, and deliver that in the lesson. And they did that in teams. So it has been a process. And what we found is, as we look at our planning from last year, now that we're into the spring term, we're saying how much better we've got in that year. Whereas last year we're thinking last spring term, yes, we know what we're doing, but this year again they're tweaking those same lessons on the journey that they've gone throughout the year, and this is our second year. Especially looking at the greater depth and how do you challenge those more able children without going on to another objective.
So in that early phase, when you'd just been to this thing in the course in Birmingham, and you'd come back and you were starting to train the teachers, how much did you micromanage what was going on in the classroom, and how much did you just say, go and try it, go and find out? And has that changed over time?
Yes, I think initially it was, right, go and see how it is. So it wasn't really prescriptive. There was a formula, so we knew what we have to do first. But it was a little bit about discover how it's working, especially for the different year groups. Now we've also got, because we're a pan of 43, so we had mixed year groups. So we had 3 classes of 1-2s, 3 of 3-4s and 3 of 5-6s. And what we found is that it needs to be taught in single year groups. So this was a little bit of an issue. So what we had was we were teaching with 43 in a class, but with two members of staff. So 43 in a class, and yes, there was a lot in the classroom, but it did work. Now this year, and from September, I've only got 2 year groups now that are mixed. So my 1-2s and my 3-4s are still big classrooms when they get taught for maths. They quite enjoy it because they're all together as a year group. It's just the logistics of having enough chairs and tables. So often children are on the floor and they rotate. Ideally, you want single year groups, and hopefully next September I'm moving more towards that as my pan increases to 60 with 3 new classrooms. So it can be done with mixed year groups. It's just having the staff to deliver it. So that's how we overcame that, by having really big classrooms.
So just run me through this again. So you put your 1 and 2s together all in the same classroom?
So year 2s go to, so if there's 3 classrooms in that year group,
right.
So all the 2s have their maths together and all the year 1s have their maths together.
So you've effectively got single year groups
yes,
for maths.
That's right.
But they just end up with big classes.
Yes.
Right,
and the teacher of the mixed year group, she will take turns. So she might have a week in one class and a week in the other, and the teacher assistant will go in the other class. And then sometimes during the textbooks, they'll go into the spare classroom to sit and do the work. But all the teaching and learning that they do together with them, with all the apparatus, that's all done in a big group of 43.
Just tell me how you feel the pupils have responded to
this change. I think for me, as far as impact, going into a classroom and seeing children enjoying mathematics, and not just on the surface, but really understanding number has been quite revolutionary. And it's been wonderful to see. And as they go into their second year and the teachers are commenting on what their knowledge now, that they you know, last year's year twos didn't know that they could rename a number and, you know, work out calculations in a different way and use apparatus. And I think that depth of knowledge and understanding for me is the most important impact that we've had. And for example, yesterday, one of the teachers from George Spencer, which is our secondary school, came down to see what are year 6 doing in maths, because they've noticed the difference with the Chetwynd children going into year 7. So they wanted to see what's the maths like here. And she was astounded about what they were doing. And again, not you know, it's not just the surface, it's a good knowledge and a greater depth of understanding about number. So to me, that's made the biggest impact. And beside that is the staff enjoying maths. You know, they enjoy it, they talk about it. It's really interesting when you go into the staff room that they're talking about ways of teaching fractions or decimals, and they're talking about teaching and learning in their breaks and ways to do things, and I think that's wonderful. Or they've seen a good clip on YouTube that explains how to use Cuisenaire with, you know, to show fractions, and that's the sort of discussions that the staff are having. So again, that's completely changed and had a massive impact.
Yeah. What about parents? You mentioned briefly that parents of more able children might have given you a bit of a challenge.
Yes.
Has that died down? Was it a big thing? How did you manage that?
It was in the autumn term. So when we initially rolled it out in autumn 2016, those that were more able were going home and saying they know it. And there was a little bit of reluctance from the most able children and then therefore their parents. So when we had a big meeting with our parents to explain. We had one during the day and then one in the evening to explain the whole concept and introduce it to them. And we just said, well, in fact, it was one of the parents to say, at the moment, she doesn't feel that they're being challenged, but we trust you and we'll come back at half term. And we had another meeting there for at half term. And I think what they then realised is how quickly their child was being challenged. And sometimes they had to go back, that they had to go back to the beginning of the journey to see how do you solve that problem, whereas they were wanting to race on. And some of the more able children were finding it very difficult to prove it. You know, how do you know that? They might have been getting the answer very quickly, but they couldn't really explain why. And can they prove that they are right? And would it work in a different concept with different numbers? And that was the part that they found challenging. So quickly we found that the middle group were coming up to the more able, and but it was great, some of the discussions that they were having, and then they were our biggest turnaround for our more able children. And for example, I looked at our data, but the greater depth for maths was 37%, which doubled our prediction that how many we'd get for greater depth. So the more able were getting challenged, and they were challenging one another. With the parents, I think for them it was the communication, just communicating with them what you're doing. And again, just how the staff were, that it's okay to say, I'm not too sure about this, and discuss ways to teach. The parents were, it was like okay to ask, what is it about the maths and how do I help my child? So we were putting on workshops about mastery and what is the bar model, and how do we work out division and multiplication, and they loved it. And what was interesting is that we had far more dads attend those sessions than we've ever had in school before, because they were really intrigued and again wanted to support their children at home. But for themselves, they said, yeah, I wish they were taught like that when they were at school. So I think it's that importance of keeping them in the loop, saying to them, you know, and being honest, with not quite, you know, it's something new to us, give us a bit of time. But they were, by October half term, they were convinced it was the right way to go.
Right. And now do you get challenges from parents, or is that disappeared?
No, it's completely disappeared.
Okay.
All we as parents though will come in and ask if they can see it and be part of the lesson. And that's really interesting because, yeah, they love it. And they're often in there to help, but they want to get involved themselves. So that's been a very interesting journey. And we just want to include them more. So our next step with parents is trying to put more on our website. The information on our website, at the moment, staff are going to do little videos about this is what we're learning in year 3, this is how we're working out a division, so they can help at home.
What about concrete evidence? I mean, that's the thing, isn't it, in the end, the bread and butter of the school.
So thankfully, all our gut feeling throughout the year was it was the right thing to do, and even if the SATs go, you know, if we plummet, we're going to stick with it, and we think it might need 2 years. However, we were delighted because we got 91% at age-related for maths and 37% at greater depth. Now, this cohort previously, in September, we had predicted 76%, so 76% to get age-related, and less than 20 to get greater depth. Now, that 91% included children with special educational needs, and we saw such a rapid progress with our special needs children because they were in the lessons. You know, they weren't taken out for them. They were part of it, that lesson and that journey, and they really rose to the challenge. So it was a delight to see that these children that had previously been underage related had got with the new outcomes, the new criteria, that they had got it. And for some of the parents, when we told them and they opened the letters, it was a real celebration of joy because it was remarkable that some of these kids and the progress they made. So the data, it was great, and we just hope we can sustain it this year and get all the children, until you've got 100%, making that rapid progress. That's what you want for every child.
And do you have any children that can't access the lesson at all? And how do you manage that?
Yeah, we have some children. So we've got some children not in year 6 that are really working at an age that is probably around year 4. So what we try to do for that, we run a breakfast club 3 mornings a week because we still want them in the lessons and accessing that age-related curriculum. But we are very aware that they need to close the gaps of the knowledge that they don't know in those previous year groups. So we run a breakfast club, and that's attended by those children, and that's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And in that breakfast club, we do lots of pre-teaching, and that's about closing the gap. I'd love to get to the ideal situation where we're not doing any interventions, that's not required. But at the moment, and as they come through the school, hopefully that will be the case. But at the moment, it's just doing that intervention in the morning just to try and close those gaps for those children.
So the breakfast club intervention in the morning is pre-teaching?
Yes.
That's addressing what you're going to cover in the lesson later on in the day,
That's right. Yeah. And sometimes it might be going, right, we need to go right back to this objective here in year 4. So we've done assessments where we know where their gaps are, and it's about, trying to get them a good level of knowledge about those areas in order for them to access the year 6 curriculum.
So would you now say that it was embedded in your school and you're moving on to look at some other focus area that needs to be addressed, or do you think it's going to take longer with the focus on maths before you can let up and think about something else? Yeah.
So it is still a priority. It's still on our school development plan, along with writing and reading, but maths is still very high on our agenda, and I think it will continue to be.
You've mentioned Gemma, who's your primary mastery specialist from Cohort 1, and so she was obviously getting a lot of input from outside, and I wonder how you've managed her coming and going, and the financial implications of that and the disruption implications of that. Has that been difficult, or has that brought more to the school than it's taken away?
Absolutely, and it is difficult, and it is managing it because she's led maths, and she's assistant head, and she's only 3 days a week, and she's primary maths specialist, and she's got a class. So it's really difficult to juggle all of that. However, although, as a head, you want to keep her in your school and you want her to work with all the staff to make sure that you've got that consistency, I think it's so important because that training was an incredible training that she's received. I think it is important to give back. So, and by Gemma going out and supporting other schools, again, she's learning and bringing things back to our school as well. So we have the teacher research group, so it's 6 schools that are coming into our school regularly to discuss maths and observe maths, and then Gemma going into their schools as well. Now financially we've got the Maths Hub, so they give us some cover for supply when Gemma is out of school. And also the CPD is so heavily subsidised. It's not just Gemma that goes on the maths training, it's all of the staff, and that's teaching assistants as well as our teaching staff, that they're able to go on it. In fact, when we've had inset days and training, even my office staff want to come in and find out, and during the build up to SATs, they've taken, you know, and gone into classes and taken them because they were just so intrigued by it, by all the interest and I suppose all the chat that the teachers were having, that they wanted to have a little look. So I do think it's important that you work with other schools, and yes, it is a bit of a headache when you've got key member of staff out, but that training, it was good and it does need to be shared.